About use case analysis. This is the kind of like the first step at in the requirements gathering phase of any software effort, is to kind of ask the user, what is it that you need, right? What is that you want the software to do? What is that you're trying to do? And there's a fairly formal set of steps by which we can start gathering these requirements, right? And there are different types of requirements depending on the audience that you are interacting with, right? Typically, the first set of interviews will be with the owners of the business, right? Or those that have a very high stake on whatever project that you're building, and usually those are any requirements that you gather are usually referred to as business requirements, right? I want to increase sales by 10%. I want to convert any leads into a viable business. I want to increase my business. I want to grow my business. So those are very high level business requirements, and that might be that might translate to what we have been hearing from the fields, right? Real people using our software on their complaints, their pain points, on how we could address some of their pain points and align those kinds of things that we're trying to fix with the business requirements. Those eventually get converted into concrete, actionable items on what is it that we're going to do. We're going to add new web pages here. We're going to remove this. We're going to consolidate these views, and we're going to change the data model. We're going to be able to capture integrate with social networks and whatnot, right? So those I'll convert it into actual things that we're going to build, and we refer to those as functional requirements. And we need to be able to encode certain rules about the business on certain dates or certain hours that the business operates, certain rules on security, and we capture all those kinds of things again as a business rules that eventually will be implemented as perhaps constraints on our data model, right? That you can't remove that without removing that as well, or if somebody asks to be removed from a particular social network, we don't actually remove them. So those are all business decisions on how is it that we make our clients happy, but also keeps us as a viable business. Also, what kind of very requirements that might be a little bit less easier to measure, such as we want to have good quality. We want it to be usable, right? These are some vague requirements that are very, very hard to measure. That it's portable, that it's reusable, all the usable abilities that a piece of software could have. Also, the external interfaces of how our particular application depends or interacts with other systems and integrates with other systems. Also, what kind of methodology we're going to be using, whether legacy kind of waterfall methodologies or more a little more agile that can adapt to changes. It comes from the requirements. And what is the overall strategy that the team is going to use? So at first, our typical first couple of interviews with our clients will be very high level, very open-ended, and they'll be very social. We might try to make them feel at home, and oftentimes it won't be. Well, tell me your requirements, right? The user, the client, typically doesn't even know what it means, what a requirement even is, right? So usually we let them just perhaps babble, right? Just talk and talk and talk, describing various parts of their business. Oftentimes they'll be telling us things that are completely irrelevant to what it is that they actually need, right? And it is our job, to be able to convert those conversations into actual formal requirements, right? Identifying what makes sense to build and what doesn't make sense to build. Also, it's very important that we identify the folks that are actually going to be using the application, the piece of software, right? So that we can hear from those folks, what is going to drive their success. Okay, so there are many artifacts that are going to be managed when you are gathering these requirements, right? You're going to be documenting a lot of things, but we have to be careful that documentation, we're not going to be creating documentation just for documentation purpose, right? The purpose of the documentation is for the team to better understand what it is that we're building, right? We're going to be documenting the system, perhaps a system architecture to have a very very high level map of what it is that we're going to be building. Not that any one person might understand the entire architecture, but at least it'll give us a map of where our little piece might fit into the larger scheme. We're going to be capturing the use cases that represent the step-by-step goals that the users or step-by-step actions that users take to be able to interact with the systems, and what they would be expecting as a response from the system as they try to achieve a particular goal, right? And we'll capture the beginning state of the application as they interact with the system, and then the post state of the application. We'll try and identify all the various pieces, types of audiences that are going to be using this, right? Each one with their own specific type of goal in mind that they need to achieve, and also, what are the various test cases that we can use to verify that indeed we have achieved or we have provided the particular value that the users were looking for. So use cases is one of the first set of steps that we use to identify and document the system. We want to be able to describe, what are the goals that users are trying to achieve, right? Either we might follow them around, right, all day as they go from one place to another. They fill out a form, they submit a form over there, they check on whether the form has been successfully completed. So we're just following that, just jotting down what is it that they're trying to do, right? And trying to identify patterns, trying to identify actions that can be generalized perhaps or can be optimized, and we try to look at the forms that they fill out, the type of information that they're trying to capture, right? And all these things are going to drive what the data model is going to be eventually, right? And what are the relationships between the various pieces of information that they're capturing. Here's a very abbreviated template for a use case where you would have kind of like a verb sentence at the very top as a title for the use case, right? Trying to describe what it is that the user is trying to achieve, right? The user is trying to log in. The user is trying to order something, a particular product, right? The user is trying to return a product, right? A user is trying to create a playlist. The user is trying to add songs to that playlist, right? So all these would be verb phrases, right? That describe the overall goal for a particular user, right? And then you would perhaps in a description field you would describe a bit what the context is, right, of what the user is trying to do. What is the user trying to accomplish, right? So this would be some perhaps a verbose set of paragraphs trying to describe what the user is trying to accomplish. Preconditions, you would describe there or list all the assumptions, right, on what this particular use case might be. For instance, the user needs to be logged in, right? The user needs to have an account, right? The user has to be in the role of a buyer or the role of a seller, right? All these are preconditions for the following steps, right? Assuming that the user is a buyer, then the use case might be that the seller is trying to create a new store, or the seller is trying to create a new product, or the seller is trying to create a category, or trying to reorder products from one category to another category, right? Those are all distinct goals that the user is trying to achieve, right? All those goals, right? All these things that the user is trying to achieve is going to drive the rest of the design. Okay, we can't start designing anything until we know what we're trying to solve, right? What are the pain points? What are the things that folks are trying to achieve, right? This is going to drive the design, right? How it's organized, what things are related to one another, what are attributes, what are classes, what are foreign keys and primary keys, right? And what kind of insert statements we're going to use and update statements we're going to use to be able to fulfill these requirements. Yes. So the second assignment is going to ask you, hey, given the UML class diagram that we looked at previously, given these use cases, right? Design a schema, design inserts and updates and select statements and deletes, right? That fulfill each one of these use cases, right? The user removed a store. What does that mean? Well, what about all the products? Do the products get removed also inside of that store? Or do they now are part of some default store, right? Or what is the mapping between those two things, right? So depending on the business rules, depending on the use cases, you'll implement one set of SQL statements or another set of SQL statements, right? But they all come from having analyzed what are these use cases. You can't implement those until you have a well-designed set of use cases. So once you have the preconditions, then you have various steps by which the user is going to accomplish that particular set of goal, right? And these again, they would be high level. Usually, they would not assume that they're using any particular device, right? Whether it shouldn't assume they're using a desktop or they're using a phone or using a tablet or web technology. So, for instance, you would not say they clicked on this link, for instance, right? Instead, you would leave it a little bit vague, as in they selected a product, right? As opposed to clicked on a product. Clicked assumes a particular implementation, right? Whereas select might leave it vague, right? So leaving some leniency for the end user, for the developers, right, to decide, how they're actually going to implement the user interface. Yes, right. So this describes the goal, but doesn't describe how it's actually implemented. Make sense, right? Finally, at the end, you might have a post condition. What is the state of the system after having gone through all these steps? Also, you might describe here alternate paths. Usually, the paths here might include the happy path, right? What should happen if everything goes well, right? If there are no exceptions, no errors, there is an actual product that they're looking for. There's enough quantity that they want to ask for, and then at the bottom you might have alternative paths, right? If there was an error, if the product is no longer there, if the seat that they were trying to reserve that actually said it was there is no longer there, right? It was taken. How do you handle all these exceptions? So the alternate paths would capture all those kinds of things. Here's some other templates. Different businesses will have different templates, right? So if you work for one company, the templates might look slightly different than other companies, right? Each one will have their own. There's several ones that are fairly standard. So here's one for viewing an order. So for instance, the use case is the user wants to view an order. The actor or the set of users, one of these, they're in the role of a customer. The precondition is that the order exists and then the customer has been authenticated. And here's an interaction between what the user is doing and how the system responds. So the actor might type in or submits. Notice I said types in, right? I'm assuming it's a keyboard, right? But they certainly could speak it, right? So not necessarily should you say the user types in the number. They submit the order number. How's that? It could be that they clicked on a link that with the order, or they speak it, or they type it, and then so the user submits the order number, and the system responds with the order details for that particular order. The user submits And there could be some alternatives, right? The user submits an order number that does not exist. So the alternative would be, there's an error message that the order number is not found, right? Obviously, this is just one little sample, but you could have, 10, 15, 20 different steps, right, to accomplish a particular use case. Here's another template. This is a little more verbose on the various things that you're capturing. These might have a very specific way on how they number and refer to these use cases. Oftentimes, these use cases might be transformed into specific tickets or specific tasks that are entered later in Jira, right? Or any other task management system, and these use cases will follow from the use cases dictionary onto those tickets. Those tickets typically then get converted into code repositories, right, or branches from Git or CSV or whatever source control you're using. So that and then when your source is done, you then submit pull requests, right, on that particular branch, and it gets merged back into the source code. Yes, and you can follow along, right, how the entire life cycle goes through this, right? Starting from the requirements, going into the tickets and the tasks that were generated, the source code that was written to fulfill that and implement that, right, and then eventually goes into the source code. So it's a nice way of keeping track that we're indeed actually somebody worked on this particular use case, right? And see how the entire life cycle goes along. User stories are a little more verbose, a little more high level, that also try to capture the same type of information, but a little more vague, a little more less granular, right? That you might have several use cases, right, that encompass or try to implement this particular user story, right? They're trying to perhaps describe who the user is, what their overall goals are, what kind of role do they participate or do they have in the organization, right? And just to give a context, right, on what the user is trying to achieve. User scenarios, again, they're also very high-level descriptions, right, that might encompass not only a happy path but also alternative paths. You'll have all sorts of software requirement documents, right, that might capture this and document it at different granular levels. We're going to be spending most of our time down here in the draft models and generating what the models are based on what the requirements were generated at a higher level. Here are some sample use cases based on some online stores that you might be familiar with. Here's from, if you're at Amazon.com, somebody must have documented these types of use cases. Somebody wants to track an order, somebody wants to check a status on an order, somebody wants to cancel an existing order or change the shipping or change the billing. FreshBooks allows you to maintain accounting books. They want to create receive a payment, or they want to create a new client. They want to create an invoice or write an expense. Online purchase. In general, you might want to add things to a shopping cart or check it out, or pay, search a catalog, remove something from a shopping cart. So these are all distinct use cases that you would need to document, right? That would then drive the rest of the system. Here's another from describing a system that allows folks, kind of like a social network, that allow folks to participate. These are fishermen that they can share and brag about fish that they catch. They can participate in competitions and written for this particular organization, the National Oceanographic Association, because they want to gather information from fishermen out there and gather what the health of the ecosystem is, right? By measuring the sizes and abundance of fish all throughout the New England fishing areas. So the folks that would be participating, we would describe as the various actors in this system. Well, certainly you have the fishermen, right? The folks that are actually fishing. That's what's part of the audience, right? One of the actors. and we describe them, right? They plan a fishing trip this weekend. They want to take pictures of their fish that they catch. They want to take notes on their trips that they take over the weekend. They want to post their experience on the website. So they're a user. You might have a sponsor, right? So folks that might want to sell the things in their social network, folks that want to sell their services for boat rides, or they want to sell the baits, or they want to sell the gear. They want to sell all sorts of various folks that sponsor and advertise on their web, and they might have also a user interface, right? That allows them to generate their products that they want to sell on the website, and how to target different folks on the website, right? So they might need a user interface. And there might be many different types of users. So here's a use case of one of the end users wants to search for a location, right? They want to plan a fishing trip this weekend. So they might enter either cities, towns, states, or it might be that their GPS grabs their location, and depending on that location, maybe they show it on a map, and they might maybe enter the location or the zip code, or maybe the latitude, longitude automatically generated, and the system responds with a map of the locations of interest. The fisherman selects the location of interest, and then the system displays details about the location of interest, and the fisherman just confirms that that's the place they want to go, and they select it, and they dismiss the selection. Another use case that they want to plan a trip, they might set the location, they might send invitations to other folks in the same social network. The other fisherman might accept or reject the invitation, and then it notifies everybody else in the trip of an upcoming trip. Okay. All right. So here's several others. To document them, typically there's a formal way of documenting these, where you document you represent the system as a box, and the various actors on either side and outside of the system, and the various interactions that they're having with the system, right? And you represent each type of interaction, each use case as an oval, right? That they're trying to, the fisher is trying to search a location, plan a trip, create gear that they're going to take with them, post a new fish that they caught. The sponsor might want to add products, maybe want to create a store on our system, right? They want to create maybe an ad and target the fishermen's, right, on their gears, right? Some of their use cases are shared amongst the sponsor and the fisherman. For instance, they both need to create an account. They both need to update a profile, right? And this is going to drive the data model, right, on the various domain objects and classes and their relationship. But it's also going to drive the user interface, right? For being able to implement and for users to actually be able to accomplish any one of these goals, there has to be some user interface piece that allows them to search a location, right? Plan a trip, create a gear, or create a fish entry, right? At some point, somebody's going to say, well, where's a user interface that allows me to create a product or create a store? Where is that? Where is that page? Not necessarily needs to be a dedicated page. It could be a page might implement several use cases, right? Or a use case might be so complicated that it might be spread over several pages, right? And those concerns are part of the UX design, right? Someone who has experience in user interface or user experience might decide that this use case might be a little bit too big, right? Might be a little bit too overwhelming for the user. Just imagine the way we generate an order, right? Typically, we use some kind of a wizard that we ask the user to select the product somehow, right? Then we ask them for their when they want to check out, select some billing information and then the shipping information, right? And we go through this 3 or 4 or 5 pages, right? Where we have decided that it's too much information to ask it all at once, right? So that decision is more UX driven than data driven, right? as far as the data is concerned, we're probably capturing everything in the same table, right? We're all capturing in one or two tables, perhaps, right? So the concerns on how to model the data might be a little bit different concerns on how to display the data, right? And how to better gather this information from the users. But nevertheless, both of them are driven, right, from an initial identifying what the use cases are, who their users are, and what are their goals. Okay. All right. So let's. I think that's enough. Everybody understand what use cases are in general? All right. All right. So next, I'd like to describe. Start looking at how is that we formally start to capture some of these objects, some of these classes, some of these verbs, and represent them formally using the UML, the Unified Modeling Language. Okay, so let's take a look at that.